Film Commission. I'm the production coordinator. If you have any questions about filmmaking in Cleveland, reach out to us, www.clevelandfilm.com. Today, I'm very excited to be asked to be the moderator for this filmmaker panel for the Chagrin Documentary Film Festival. This is now the 13th year, I believe, right? Yes, 13th year. So let's hear it for Chagrin Doc Film Festival. So we're gonna have a panel discussion here. I'm gonna kick it off and ask some questions, but then also we want to hear from you, our audience members. So please have your questions ready. Today, I'm happy to introduce the filmmakers to our panel. So immediately to my right here, we have David Dibble with the film Rocks for Sale. Let's hear for David. We have Dale Omori, who is involved with two films, American Dinner and American Heartbreak.
Whoa.
We also have Harlan Spector from American Heartbreak. And John Vourlis from The House Next Door. So, gentlemen, I want to first start off, tell us a little bit about your film, and then where was the spark for the film?
First victim, all right. My film is called Rocks for Sale. That's how you're supposed to say it, because it's little kids who are selling rocks to tourists in Silverton, Colorado. It's a former mining town, and it's famous for catching a steam train. You take a 50-mile journey up to Silverton. So I escaped Los Angeles because I wanted to work on the train for a summer. And so I went to Colorado and worked on the summer and learned about these little kids out here selling rocks. And at first I thought it was just a cute little thing. They're like selling lemonade or something simple like that. But I soon learned that there's like a history behind that. Other people on the train told me, oh yeah, I used to sell rocks and my parents used to sell rocks. And so I learned there's a history. I learned there's a city ordinance that dictates that at age 13 they can no longer sell rocks. And there's like quite a neat history. So that was like the spark. Okay, there's a little bit of a story there. I think I'll dive into that.
Yeah.
I'll spend, a month or two on it. So 5.5 years later, the movie's done. So that was the spark on that one.
That's awesome.
I'll just tell you about one of the films. I'll let Harlan fill you in on American Heartbreak. Yeah, but my other film is American Dinner, and the inspiration was I have my own production company, small production company. I do a lot of work in healthcare. And I was doing a lot of work in the wake of George Floyd on DEI issues. And and there's a lot of anti-Asian backlash around COVID, and I had some people reach out to me on Facebook and just said, hey, talking about what's happening. And it actually started, and I never really told my own story. My job has always been in journalism, so I always tell other people's stories. So I thought, oh, you know what? I had this little germ of an idea, no pun intended, but I wrote this little essay, and it has to do with my family's long history with spam, and kind of how it kind of culturally, how it kind of plays into my story a little bit. So that's what American Dinner is about. It's really more about my family, and actually is kind of an homage to my mom.
Excellent.
Nice. Hi there, everybody. Dale and I worked on American Heartbreak. It's called the Glenn Frank story, American Heartbreak, Glenn Frank story. Glenn Frank was a professor at Kent State. He was on the ground during the May 4th, 1970 shootings. And there were a lot of documentaries and books and articles written about May 4th. It's always been an interest of mine. Dale and I, around the 50th in 2020, we were talking about, let's do something, But the story has been told so many times in so many different ways. There's so many stories that are out there, have great stuff that's been done in books. And what do we do that's different? And when we were sort of in the exploration stage, we found out about Glenn Frank, we kind of knew what he had done. He had stepped between the National Guard and the students after the shootings, and where a mass of students were really shocked, horrified, angry, ready to charge the National Guard. I mean, they'd just seen what had happened, and Glenn Frank convinced them to back off and get out of there, because the guard had told him, the general had told him, if these students don't get out of here, we're moving in. And he saved who knows how many lives that day through his impassioned speech to them. They all knew who he was, very popular professor on campus, respected guy. They listened to him. And our story starts basically with his speech, what he did there that day, and follows him, what happened to him afterwards. And to make a long story short, he was haunted by the shootings for the rest of his life, and tried to get to the bottom of why it happened, which nobody really has. And despite his efforts, he wasn't able to find the truth either. And his dying wish, he wrote a long manuscript, did a lot of research, did his own investigation. His dying wish, literally on his deathbed, he asked his daughter, his family, his children, please get my book published. And his book's never been published. You can find it online, but it's never been published. So that's the story of Glenn Frank. And we were thrilled to be able to tell a story that really most people never heard of.
I think like everybody here had an idea and then fell down the rabbit hole of documentary filmmaking. Someone came to me about 5 years ago, maybe, and said, you know, there's this untold story of how Cleveland has responded to the disaster that was caused by the foreclosure crisis in 2007. And I heard that initial pitch, and I'm like, well, why does this matter today? And because it's 10 years later, people have moved on. And he started telling me about some of the things that were actually happening, still happening, 10, 11, and they're still happening today, 12, 13 years later, of trying to clean up a disaster that if it had been like a natural disaster, like an earthquake or a fire or a tsunami, it would have been national news. That's how devastating it was to the city. And this person who came to me was connected to a lot of people who were involved both in the original housing crisis and in the cleanup. And we started to interview people and quickly found out, yeah, this is a big story. And the film I made before this was a movie about the Italian-American community up in Lake County in Wickliffe that has an annual bocce tournament. And bocce, for those of you who don't know, is Italian lawn bowling. And I got fascinated by the community that was putting this event on. And I'm attracted to what makes communities work and how they function under stress. And there was nothing that has happened to Cleveland, including the slow Rust Belt decay, that is anything like this disaster. And so it became a labor of love more than anything to get it done, and we finally did. And thank you, Marianne, for liking it.
It's a perfect segue into the next question I wanted to ask. Us fellow documentarians, we do this because we love the story. We don't necessarily, we're not all Michael Moores, or we're not all, Brett Morgans, who are going to be, make millions of dollars off of this. It's like, what are some of the challenges that you found when trying to tell your story, even from a budgetary standpoint or just, time? I should have.
Indiana Jones.
How embarrassing. Sorry.
The challenge. I think the challenge with mine is simply finishing it. It was just like a personal project that was a side thing. And so literally when anything else came along, I pushed it very far to the side, and I would kind of have to reboot, and I have hours of kids yelling, "Rocks for sale!" And I don't remember what my notes mean. And so I had to start over, and then a music video comes along, so it gets pushed aside. And so that's why I said it took 5.5 years. Personal project, driving up to Silverton all the time, and hanging out with kids was the fun part, but just finishing it. And I actually have the pandemic to thank for that, because I had nothing else to do. It's like, I guess I better put a rough cut together finally, and that was my challenge. Not that much of a challenge.
I do have one really quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Now, with some of these kids, like, I mean, you have certain shots where some of these kids have like wads of cash. Did you ever know like the haul that like some of these people would take home?
Some of them are very secretive about it. They didn't want any government officials to know. These kids can make a lot of money. Some of them would say, I made $200 one day, and
Wow.
then one kid came to me later and said, "Can you change that to 60? I don't think I should say that much," but they're cute kids.
They don't want the IRS coming after them. or
Exactly, yeah. They're cute kids, and they're selling. They're little scammers. As if you watch the movie, you'll see. But they do make a lot, and as mentioned in the documentary, sometimes they make a lot more than people working in the shops and the restaurants would make. These little kids did pretty well sometimes.
Yeah.
Like it shows on there, like one guy saved up for a Mustang. There's stories of helping their family. Most of them spend it all on ice cream, as you'll see that in the documentary too. So it's kids and deciding what to do with their money. That's the thing. But some
That's
of them
amazing.
could be very rich if they kept it. If they knew that, yeah, yeah.
And Dale, tell us some of the challenges with both films.
We were talking to some high school kids yesterday, and I think it's like, as far as budget goes, I've never had a budget ever. I've never made money on any of my documentaries. You know, I just try to limit the costs, limit the out of pocket, because it's not coming back, and that's okay. You know, it's like I don't have a lot of vices, so this is really my vice. I'm not really even sure why I make these, honestly. If you were to ask Harlan and I why we made these, I think it's like because we can. I don't know. You know, there's right, and like halfway through any project I have, halfway through I'm like, what the heck was I thinking, right? Because you're thinking, and at the end, honestly, at the end I'm like, wow, this actually worked, kinda. You know what I mean? It's like it's a little bit more coherent than, because halfway through you're like thinking, wow, does this make sense? Is this even worth finishing? And I think that's the biggest challenge for me, is just, kind of like why it takes a long time. Sometimes it's just like I can't drag myself over to my computer and look at this footage anymore, right? Yeah. And it's always done on a part-time basis. You always have to make a living somehow, so it's always one of those side projects. It's a side gig. I will say, I think, so American Heartbreak was its own set of trials and tribulations, but I will say my own story was, the challenge was I've never told a personal story. So I was in journalism. I worked for the Plain Dealer for like 20-some years. And I always told other people's stories. Even now, I have my own little production company. It's always telling other people's stories, which is, you're removed. You don't have, you have a stake in it, but not like if you're telling a personal story. Not that this thing is like all revealing or anything. It's just a little awkward. It was awkward, and at the end of the day, I think if you're... at the end of the day, there's the ending, and I won't say what it is. But at the end of the day, I said, if you're going to tell a personal story, then you have to make it personal. And I think that was the biggest challenge, right? You can kind of put up that veneer, but at the end of the day, you have to kind of come clean, at least to a point. So that was the biggest challenge for that one. So
I think when I think of the biggest challenge in doing the story about Glenn Frank, writing about or doing a documentary about May 4th shootings at Kent State, it's a complicated story. It followed, you have to the context of it is so important. And to get that across in a short film is not easy. And just for our own, we had to do a lot of research to understand all the events. I mean, it was 3 days of unrest and culminated in the shootings that Monday on May 4th. And, you know, trying to understand it all, where everybody was. It was a crazy scene, there was close to 800 National Guardsmen in Kent, and they were called in by the governor, and after there had been some rioting the previous Friday night in downtown. It was an anti-war protest over the expansion of the Vietnam War when Nixon announced the invasion of Cambodia. Well, there's protests all over the country, mainly on college campuses. But sort of getting the context of the times and the event itself, and getting inside Glenn Frank's mind, which you can see how his mind worked through his writings. Luckily for us, he saved everything. And his son Alan, who I neglected to mention, Alan Frank, who's now about 70 years old, his son was there. He was one of the students out there. He's one of the students that his dad saved. And he was there. He was ready to be shot. He was like, I'm not moving. And that's when we really realized we were on it, when we found out that Alan was, we never heard of him, that Glenn Frank's son was out there. And he still lives in that area, and he gave us access to his dad. I mean, crates full of papers and artifacts and everything, that he saved everything, which was great. So we were able to really kind of pour through that and get a feel for this man who was a great person. I mean, he was, as Dale has said many times, he was a conservative Democrat who didn't believe in the anti-war movement. He tried to understand it. He didn't believe either. He wasn't partisan. He wasn't ideological. He was always sort of trying to act in the best interest of doing what was right as a citizen, as a member of the community. And he sacrificed a great deal looking for the truth. So anyways, back to the original question, sort of trying to understand what's going on with him and the context of the times. I think that was probably the biggest challenge, would you say?
Yeah, I think if I could add just one more thing.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges too was, and not to disparage any Vietnam era war movie, but I think it was like we didn't want to fall into that trap. There's been so much done of that era and of that event particularly. I think one of the things I'm actually kind of proud of is we used no period music in it. And because I thought, we didn't have sounds of helicopters or Creed's Clearwater Revival, and so I think that was deliberate. I think it was like we didn't want it to turn into, and I hate to use the word, but I think there's a certain cliche factor there that I think we wanted to avoid. And then when it got down to it, it really wasn't a story about the era, it was a story about this man. And I think once we honed, we focused in on that, and we knew where we were going, I think it was much easier. But it was a long, circuitous route to get to that point.
Well, the whole movie was, for me, for The House Next Door, was just one long challenge. It started with the fact that I didn't want to go raise money again. I had done this on the first film I did, and it was not a pleasant experience. So I was not going to do that again. But then I found the subject so compelling. I'm like, well, how am I going to pull this off? Because I don't like editing. I'm not a camera person. I'm not really even a documentary person, though I have made a successful documentary. And I did it because as you said, I could, right? I want to make films, and documentary films in this day and age are extremely makeable. Technology has made them, has made the possibility of creating your own film, feature-length film even, possible. So I started thinking about how this could happen. And then I remembered a student of mine. I teach at Cleveland State. I'm an adjunct professor there. And a student of mine had come to one of my classes a few years before, and it was a production class. And he said, "Hey, I made this documentary. Can we show it in class?" Any excuse to show a film in class is a good excuse. And we watched it, and it was really good. It was about the effect of the heroin epidemic on this tiny little town in Indiana where Evan Prunty grew up. Flash forward a few years, Evan Prunty graduates, and he starts his own videography company, and it's very successful. And he and his cousin Hunter have a studio full of gear, just tricked out 12,000 square feet of anything you could want to make a movie. So I thought, let's go talk to Evan. I said, "I'm thinking about making this documentary. It's about Cleveland. Are you interested?" Yes. Just before I could even finish, it was yes. So we started filming, and the movie could have never happened without him. And then Evan is so busy, he's not here today, and he's barely going to be able to squeeze in the screening on Saturday, but he's coming. But he didn't have time to edit the film, and I didn't have the burning desire to sit in a hole in the ground for a year. And then I remembered that guy over there. Another student of mine, Graham Beck. And Graham, first of all, is a very cool dude. Non-traditional student from Detroit, which is also good, because if you're not from Cleveland, you should be from Detroit. And Graham was a good editor and a good storyteller, and he had made a short film, a documentary, and I saw it, and I'm like, wow, that's really good. And so I said, "Graham, how would you like to join this crazy production and be the editor?" And before I could finish the sentence, it was yes. And so those challenges were solved by just the good fortune of teaching students who love film probably more than I do, I think. And I like it a lot. And the final challenge, of course, was the challenge that has affected everybody in this room in one way or another, and that was the pandemic. Because Graham and I were humming along 2-3 years ago now, 2019, right? March. We were like, we'll have this movie done by the summer. And then we didn't see each other again for 15 months. And so the movie just sat on the shelf for 15 months, waiting for Graham and I to be able to sit in the same room. And, you know, we each did little things to try to push it along, but really it would have never got done if the pandemic hadn't been finished. And
Absolutely. You know, and I don't know if like we're on the same wavelength right now, but that kind of parlayed into my next question was, you know, with the pandemic, I think it made a lot of filmmakers, you know, reconceptualize some things and you know, maybe tell that personal story that they haven't told. How did the pandemic affect you as a filmmaker?
It helped me finish my movie. Actually, I had just got a rough cut done, and then I got a call to do some music videos, and so that was kind of the heart of it, actually. And so how are we going to make a music video during all this nonsense? And I would say the structure of having to make it just had to be much safer and keep everyone apart. Well, there was one video I was doing, it was supposed to be a vintage circus. Like, okay, that's not going to happen, obviously. It couldn't happen anyway because it had zero budget, but still, it couldn't happen because we're not going to have audiences, we're not going to have that kind of thing. So I kind of had to revision it and focus on like specific things and crew with masks and all that. It just made things difficult, obviously, but we found a way. Got to make your movie somehow.
Absolutely.
As far as American Dinner, I think it really didn't affect it at all. I mean, I was actually, during the pandemic, I was busier than ever, quite honestly. But for American Heartbreak, in a way, I think it was kind of a lucky break in a lot of ways, because I think we were going in a certain direction with the film until the pandemic hit, right? So we had to kind of pull back, limited access. Our initial idea of doing something like around the 50th anniversary wasn't going to work. And so I think we put the brakes on it, and I think we put it on hold. But I think in the end, it was a better film, because I think, we had to, I don't think we had to change direction, but I think we had to really, it forced us to really hone in on the story we ended up, and that it wasn't a story about Kent State. And it was going to be hard to do a story about Kent State because so much is done. It's like Michener did a whole book. It's like, well, I'm not going to compete with him, right? So we were able to kind of find this little angle, and I think when I look at the film, it's our way of kind of adding to that dialogue of that historical event, and maybe get people to rethink it and become reacquainted with it.
Yeah, I can't add too much to that, other than in a real concrete way, the pandemic, once we started, kind of dealing with doing a longer term project, just doing interviews, was obviously, we didn't do some, we put them off, and then when, throughout it was, there was one person that we were interviewing, he's not in the film, but, he's elderly, has health problems, and, it's like, look, we don't want to take any risks, and, so just dealing with that is sort of like everybody else in the world dealt with it. That's about it.
It had a deeper effect on me, I think, than maybe the rest of the guys up here, because I was taking care of my mother at the time. My mom was in her early 90s. 90, let's see, she would have been 93 when the pandemic started. Bedridden, still alert, but physically challenged. And I don't want to say paranoia, but the extreme vigilance of taking care of an elderly person who, if they get a cold, could disappear from the earth, really was a challenge. And I mean, we had a routine and a regiment, and we just weren't gonna upset that at all. And then when things started to break a little bit, Graham and I started talking again, and we're like, we just gotta finish this movie, because I hate not finishing anything. I will grind myself into dust before I will not finish something. And thank God Graham was like, well, why don't, I had set up this editing suite in my basement, and we had the good fortune of having a flood and ruining the basement, so it got all remodeled. It was a really nice place to hang out. And Beck just started coming over every day, and I mean, thank God, because we'd still be working on it. So I guess that was the silver lining of the whole thing, but it put us back 15 months for sure.
Wow. And so obviously, I believe this will be your world premiere, right, John?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but our other filmmakers who have probably been traveling with some of these films, what is it like being able to now, for a while there we weren't able to have audiences. How is it like to interact with audiences, seeing your film on the big screen?
This is actually my favorite part of going to film festivals, is to have an audience. And I was involved actually with the Durango Film Festival, and they were going virtual that year, and I said if I had finished my movie, I would just hang on to it and wait until you can have audiences again, because I want to hear the laughs, or I want to see the people walk out, or whatever it is. I want that reaction, and that's why I'm here now, because I know that some people will appreciate it, so that's what I like as a filmmaker. So it's like, I think it's very important. For me, it is.
I have to say, so it's after the first screening, it's pretty enjoyable, but the first screening is excruciating for me. And sometimes too, and I was we were talking to these students yesterday, and they were asking about, making films, and I said, I find the whole process quite painful and uncomfortable, right? It's like, I'm not sure why I do it. And actually, when I watch a film, and I don't know how you guys are, but you've seen it so many times, and you watch it, and you think, oh, wow, that's kind of an awkward cut. Oh, well, maybe I should, It's like, does that really make sense still? I don't know. So I have a lot of second guessing. So, but after that initial one, if you're lucky enough to be screened twice, it's nice to, because you can relax, especially if the first one goes well and the audience reacts how you hope, right? The laughs come where you think it's going to come. It's poignant where you feel like it's poignant. Then it's pretty fun. So it is really gratifying to see other people, to be able to connect with other people, and I think that's why we do these, right? So that's really fun to see.
Yeah, I mean, just having people talk to you about, so many people would say, I went to Kent State, or they had some sort of connection, and then they want to tell you, their experience, and so it's nice. It's nice to hear from people. I mean, I'm not saying like a ton of people have come up to us, but we've shown it to friends and family and various other people, and then it was screened in Cleveland, and it is nice, to have that one-on-one, where people because when you work on something for so long, you forget, you kind of like, it doesn't have that emotional impact on you that it does on someone seeing it for the first time, and it's like, oh wow, that's cool to see, like it, made you feel something, it's nice.
I'm not sure why else you would make a film or put yourself through the kind of misery that a documentary film requires if you don't get to show it to an audience. And so much love to Mary Ann and everybody at CDFF for giving us this opportunity. I can't even begin to say thank you loud enough or often enough. It's a weird experience to watch your movie, a movie you've seen, like, as you said, like 40 million times, to the point where it's just really psychological torture to keep working on it. To see it with an audience is like watching it for the first time. And I mean, that's an experience that's just worth gold. I mean, I've lived and worked in Hollywood a long time before I came back to Cleveland, and wrote a lot of scripts that came really close to getting, so that level of desire to actually get something done was satisfied on the first documentary I did. This time I think it's more, I'm just excited for people like Graham and Evan and all the people in the film to get them, see themselves tell what we think is a pretty important story to an audience of people. It's just, that's going to be for me, this experience. I'm not so stressed about this one as I was with the last time around, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited to see it with this audience.
Well, I'm predicting you guys will all have some great feedback. I want to just ask one last question. I want to really open it up to the audience as well. Thank you all for being here, by the way. As documentarians, and I just, there are a lot of people who want to get into this business, especially a lot of younger people, but then I think COVID has kind of made, people from other industries maybe want to dip their toes into the filmmaking, it kind of made them rethink a lot of things. So what are some words of advice that you would have for somebody who is potentially looking to get into the documentary world?
My first advice is always don't. But as a filmmaker, I wasn't listening to that. As a 12-year-old, I wasn't listening to that. And it's like, I'm not listening to that. I'm going to make it anyway. And so my advice now is I discovered that I am Wile E. Coyote. Every Acme product is your film. So this documentary is my latest rocket. Does it fly off and crash into a cliff? Does it fall off? And no matter what happens, there's the coyote back the next day, whether you've gone through terrible times and you're like, I want to quit or whatever. If it's inside of you and you don't want to just sit there and eat bugs, you want that roadrunner, you're back making your movies. If you find that in yourself, I mean, I could say that and say be the coyote, but you can't just be the coyote. You have to find out that you have no choice in the matter. Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. A lot of people don't have any choice. It's like, it's what you do. It's like I've done stories of musicians or writers or artists, and people don't do it because they want to make it make it. They do it because they have to. That's what they do. And I think, what is encouraging is, as you were talking about, everything's so accessible now, so much more accessible, and more so every day. The technology is more within reach to everybody. And to me, the more voices, the better. And I think the only advice I would give you is and I think in this case, as an independent filmmaker, the most important word there is independent. And I think be true to yourself and be true to your voice and listen to that and don't give up on that easily. And I think that's the best advice I can give you. Because at the end of the day, that's really all you have. And that's everybody has, everybody has a gimbal now, everybody has this and that as far as equipment goes. But what you say is uniquely yours. And I think that's the most important thing for a young filmmaker to understand and to hold on to.
I guess most of what I've learned as a documentary maker, I learned from Dale. We've worked together for over 20 years at the Plain Dealer, and we worked on a lot of stories together, and we always sort of saw eye to eye how to tell a story. And storytelling, obviously is such an important part. How do you tell the story, and how do you tell it to keep it interesting? And part of that has to do with, what you leave out, because it's so tempting to, we got to put this in there, we got to have this, and then when you talk to friends or you show it to, you should include this, you guys should do that, you guys should do, and you're just like, no, he always said, Dale always said, like, I don't want to bore people, and I have watched films where, kind of meanders here and there, and maybe I would have done it differently, but as a consumer, I feel that way often, when I'm watching something, like, they should have left some stuff out, So I think that, that's a lesson. I think that any young filmmaker or aspiring filmmaker, I think it's a good lesson to keep in mind, It's so, and same with written stories. That was always an issue in the newspaper business. You want to throw everything in there, and it's like, no, you're going to bore the reader. You can't. The reader is not going to stick with this. That's why you need good editors, and that's why you need good film editors.
That's a really nice segue. So I can give Graham some more props for being a really good editor. I've been teaching at Cleveland State as an adjunct since 2011, so I have this conversation literally at least once a semester, probably more. I especially have it in the writing classes because I'm a writer first. I think for me, the story is everything. If there's no story, then I don't know why I'm watching this thing. I'll have a lot of patience if you're going to tell me an interesting story. If you're not telling me a story and you're just doing something flashy, I get bored. My brain needs to be involved. And I tell my students, my writing students, I said, some of you are in here because you have to be in here. Some of you are in here because you want to be in here. But there's a few of you in here who can't be anything else. I said, to be a writer, to really be a writer, it's like being a priest. It's a calling. If you don't have it, don't be a priest. Too hard. The job's too hard. If you gotta write, then you will write. If you gotta make movies, you will make movies. You'll find a way. It's like the weeds and the cracks in your driveway. They find a way, right? There's cement over top of them, and yet there they are every spring, right? Because that's what they are. That's their whole function in life. And when you're a filmmaker, I guess, for better or for worse, you're stuck with that. So do the best you can. The last thing I would say, though, is, and I've really come to appreciate it more now that I made documentaries, is collaborate all the time. I mean, you guys are fortunate that you're working together, so you have a sounding board right there. I could not have made this movie without Evan and Graham, and especially Graham's such a perfect sounding board. I'm always second guessing. I'm always tearing things apart and always putting them back together. And that's a challenge, and you got to have somebody you can trust with you, and that makes all the difference. So don't do it by yourself.
That's great advice. Any audience questions? Don't be shy. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment after having watched a lot of documentaries. That beautiful statement that you made about good editing, because very often you really engage with the documentary, and then it kind of goes on, and it goes on, and then there's some extraneous details, and you realize that the people that made it, this is their baby, and they don't want to put any of it outside in the cold. And it's really, I would think editing would be one of the very hardest parts of putting all this wonderful footage back together again. But
Yeah.
I just champion you for doing it, because I think that's where you have to hold the interest of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to the Kent State shootings, there's so much there. You can go down so many roads, and there's so much to it. A lot of intrigue, a lot of unanswered questions, still to this day. And so, yeah, it's all interesting. It's all interesting. To me it is, and to Dale. But, you know, you're making a short documentary. You got to be very focused. Discipline, I guess, is the word.
Graham would appreciate this, I think. There's an old saying amongst video editors: when in doubt, take it out. Right? And I think that, I live by that. And I do. And I think Harlan and I are pretty, I mean, we got a late start in this, but we were in journalism for a very long time. And I think what that teaches, what we do, even though we were kind of novices or we came to it late, what we did have discipline. I think we learned not to fall in love with our material. We learned to be true to the story. That's your only allegiance. And I think if you kind of remember that, it's not always that easy, but I mean, we'll go back and forth. We'll say, oh, what do you think of this? It's like, nah, you know, it's like, if we had a company, if we formed a company, we would call it meh. You know, because that's largely our reaction. We are disciplined, and we've seen a lot of material, and we're like, you know, it's hard to, not to sound jaded or cynical, but I think sometimes it's kind of hard to impress us with stuff. You know, we'll look at it, it's okay. So anyhow, so I think discipline, to your point, I think that's crucial. And lastly, I will say, my wife, unfortunately, who is a wonderful, supportive, I love her to death. She's seen all my films. She lives through all this, and I'll be showing her this sequence, and she go, "Yeah, I get it already." You know, and that what you were saying is like, yeah, I get it, and so move on. So, so I think that's always the rub when you're editing is, yeah.
There's no documentary without editing. Editing is documentary. It's you don't really write a script for a documentary, though you can have a plan. All the writing is in the editing. So you're gonna spend a lot of time doing it. I think you said that probably the best, the story. Does it serve the story? And you have to be a little bit ruthless about it. And that can hurt some people's feelings in the documentary world, because you're not the people you're working with, but your subjects. My films, I interview a lot of people, and a lot of them don't make it in the movie. And navigating that emotional landscape can be challenging. But to me, it's either it's making the story better or it's not, and if it's not, it shouldn't be there. This first movie I did was only 75 minutes long because of that. And there was plenty of stuff that could have padded it out, but it just wouldn't have been as good a movie. And for me, that would have been compromising, I guess. In this film that we just did, we sort of had the opposite problem, which was, boy, we really don't want to go past 2 hours. I don't know if we can keep people focused that long in the world today. And it's a challenging subject to try to cram everything into 2 hours, because we have over a dozen people's stories interwoven here, because we don't want to tell one person's story in this case. We wanted to tell the story of a community, and you can do that, you can try to do that through one person's eyes, but it's not the same. This movie would have not been the same if we didn't have such a wide variety of characters from different perspectives. And so then it becomes a challenge of, okay, there is stuff that probably could have been in the movie, but it just would have made it too long. So, yeah.
I don't really have anything to add to that, except my family had to find a way to get $100,000 to pay for film school so I can learn, if in doubt, cut it out. That's the only thing that really stuck with me. And that's definitely the life of making a documentary, for sure, yeah. It's like a love-hate with your film and your footage. You don't want to drown the puppies, but the other ones, you kind of like prove that you should stay in there and slice it down to make it efficient and that people are interested, especially at times like I wanted to go to film festival, so you want it pretty short in general. So editing is so important, yes.
Yeah. If I could just add one more thing, I think time is kind of this relative thing. I mean, like you talk about doing a short 75. To me, it's like it's like someone would come to me with this film idea, and I said, "Yeah, I think I could do probably a good 10 minutes on that," you know. And they were thinking 10 minutes. It's like 10 minutes is 10 minutes can be a lifetime if it's poorly done,
Yes.
right? So I think so. Time's kind of this shapeshifter on you when you're editing.
Any other audience questions? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, all of these kind of have like these interesting, kind of small, unique stories, and I'm just more curious, like, where do you find these ideas? Do people present these ideas to you? Do you just stumble off a train and find kids selling rocks? Like, do they bump into you, or do you search them out? How do you find these?
In that case, yeah, I didn't stumble off the train, but yes, I was working on the train. I was a brakeman at the time, and then a conductor. I wanted to play trains, be a kid. And I would get off the train, and this one girl who was selling rocks would always come up to me and punch me. That's how I first learned about rock sellers. I thought, what? So that idea, like, literally hit me. So other times you seek stuff out, I guess. Other times they come around. It's hard to say where ideas truly come from. It's something that gives you that spark. In the case, I was like kind of sparked, like, this is kind of interesting story, so I think I'll go for it. Because you have to devote so much of your time to it. You know you have to like the idea, and it's going to spend so much pain with that idea. So the spark has to be pretty good.
I think as American Dinner, which is my personal story, I think it's almost I don't know how many musicians there are out here or visual artists, but you know, like a musician will noodle. Like my son plays guitar, so he's noodling on the guitar all the time, right? Just looking for a riff, looking for this, see what goes together. And American Dinner was kind of like that. You know, I was just coincidentally I was doing a lot of work in the area of DEI. A friend had reached out to me, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot of emphasis on that, especially right after George Floyd. But in the anti-Asian backlash, I wasn't surprised, sadly. But I grew up in this little town called Walbridge, Ohio, outside Toledo. We were the only Asian family. It was back in the '60s, you know. And sometimes, you know, it's like I had a friend reach out to me on Facebook who I haven't seen for 4 years, and she just was checking on me to see if I was okay after all this anti-Asian stuff, right? So I didn't give it a lot of thought, but she got me thinking about my own story. And then then there's one other thing that happened. I thought, oh, you know what? I thought it just intrigued me enough that I wrote this essay. And I sent it to my buddy Harlan. And I said, hey, man, I wrote this little essay. What do you think? He goes, oh, he was very encouraging. He liked it. And so then it was just like, oh, you know what? I wonder if I could turn this into a little film. And it's really one of those things where if I actually have an idea of where I want this thing to go in mind, then I'm dead in the water. I kind of have to just do it just like for the heck of it. There's nothing at stake. It's just like, yeah, I'll see what I can put together. It's my own kind of exploration into things. And that's how I approached many of the films. Like when we were doing American Heartbreak, so it's like, you know, you have that friend who comes to you and says, hey, I have this idea. And foolishly you say, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Well, I had that friend Harlan. He said, hey, you want to go check out Kent State, blah, blah, blah. I said, sure. And so, but there was nothing at stake. It wasn't like we said, let's go out and make this movie. We said, I think initially you were going to do some written pieces. And he said, oh, well, maybe you could take some photos to go with my piece. And I said, and then we were talking, well, maybe we'll do some video interviews, and then we can just kind of package it all together. So it just kind of came about kind of organically, I guess. We never really set out to make a film. We just thought, oh, you know, we kind of stumbled onto it. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, when we went out to Kent State, I said, let's see what's. We met with Lori Bose, who's the assistant director of the May 4th Visitors Center, which is on campus. They have a visitors center there. It's like a little museum. It's really good. And you know, she's in the film actually. We interviewed her on camera, and great person. And you know, she started talking about so many things. Like my head was just, you know, spinning with possibilities. You know, I mean, Glenn Frank obviously and his son was the story that just grabbed us. But you know, when you're talking about, she's talking about the victims, the 4 students who are killed, their families, their parents. You know, she said all the parents are dead now. It's like, well, yeah, of course they're. You know, it's like, well, you're doing the math. Yeah, they'd be pretty old now. But it's like, wow, you know, and these, you know, the families, the surviving family members, the siblings, and so on. In some cases, they're still very, very involved and passionate, and you know, it's not something you just get on with your life. And other people that were involved in the May 4th shootings, several of them, you know, it's just, this has been their life since then, 52 years later. Not their, sorry, there's something buzzing around here. I mean, it's not, obviously they have lives that they, you know, careers and all that, but you know, for these folks, you see how profound it is, you know, how, in some cases, honestly, I think, you know, some people have never been able to, it's really messed their lives up, you know, and that's, to me, very profound. You know, something that happened such a long time ago, and of course, any of us who know people who've been through tragedy, it never goes away. We know that, but yeah, it really struck us. I think just hearing and witnesses. It doesn't even have to be victims, but people who witnessed it, whose lives were never the same. And you know, it's just really was quite an experience. Like I had read a lot about May 4th over the years, talked to a lot of people, went down to the commemorations many times, but when, you know, during that particular visit, you know, it just brings so many things, you know, to the forefront that you realize, yeah, it happened a long time ago, but it's front and center for so many people.
If I could add. I just want to add one more thing. During that visit, there was one moment, I think it was kind of an epiphany. It didn't turn out, well, it did kind of fueled the film, is we were talking to Lori Bose, and she's talking about Glenn Frank, who you knew, and I had just seen the film they have, and their film ends with this speech that Glenn Frank made. But then she said, oh, and then Glenn Frank's son was there, and we're like, what? And to us, because we're newsmen, we're like, oh, wow, that's a great hook, you know, just from that point of view. And she says, oh, he lives in town. It's like, and so that really got us going, because we thought there's an angle that we didn't know, and that we didn't know that how widely known that was, and so we liked that hook, and that kind of what got us started.
Yeah, the first film I did, this documentary about bocce called Breaking Balls, that was a gobsmack epiphany moment. I had just moved back to Cleveland. It was summer. I was bored. A friend of mine called me up and said, hey, do you want to go down to the INA? They're playing bocce down there. I'm like, anything to get out of the house. And I live in Wickliffe, which is just up the road here, very small, suburban, working class community. And the INA is 5 blocks from where I grew up, 5 blocks. but I had been gone a long time. And my friend came and picked me up. We started driving down Euclid Avenue, and all of a sudden there was a traffic jam in Wycliffe on a Friday night, which is, in Wycliffe on a Friday night, you could walk down Euclid Avenue and never get hit by a car. This was crazy, and we get closer, and it's more traffic, and we're parking far away, and we have to walk down this quarter-mile hill, and there's people streaming in and out, and you turn around the corner, and you get into the back of this thing, and it looked like Mardi Gras. I mean, it was like a visual explosion, and I just was like, what in the hell is going on here? And my friend said, I told you it's just bocce. And I'm like, somebody should make a movie about this. And this second film, this one was really, someone came to me and said, there's a story here. And I was skeptical until I started talking to the people. And then the thing that really convinced me that there was a story here was when we got someone who, quote unquote, could be considered a villain in the piece to actually sit down in front of the camera and talk to us about what sent him to jail for 4 years. And at that point we were like, well, hell or high water, we're gonna finish this thing.
All right, so we're pretty much against the time, but I want everybody to tell us what time your film plays, and then a quick follow-up, any future projects. I know we're here to celebrate the current, but you know, if you got anything in the works.
7 p.m. tonight, River Park,
Right.
out in the open by the waterfalls. Sounded pretty cool to me. I have a bunch of different projects. I'm currently writing a short film about a little train, of course, because I've been around trains, and also a haunted train. I'm also working on a children's book. There's no train in the children's book, no. But just a couple different things to keep me busy.
Perfect.
We're in a block, both my films are in a block of local shorts, tomorrow at 1, and then, or Friday at 1, and Saturday at 11 in the park. And next project, Harlan and I were talking about, kind of tossed around this idea of, since we both came out of the newspaper industry, I think we were doing some research on a piece on the contraction of the local newspaper industry and what's left. And so we have a lot of contacts, believe it or not. And so that's sounds like it's going to be our next one.
I have a couple documentaries possible. One I've been talking to Graham about. Graham really wants to do it. I'm trying to figure out how we can make that happen without torturing ourselves for another 4 years, but we might just do it anyway, about the university system and some of the things that we see in it that we feel are problematic. Let's just leave it at that word. And another film came to me from somebody who knows somebody who's in the house next door, which is playing at 3:45 on Saturday at the church, at the Methodist church. He said, hey, my friend Chuck Stimac said you made a movie with him in it. I got this really great idea. And of course, we've all heard that before, right? And I thought, well, what the hell? If Chuck, I have a lot of respect for Chuck. The guy's a fighter. If you're a friend of Chuck's, out of respect for Chuck, I'll have lunch with you, because I'm a big lunch guy. And I sat down with him, and he dropped this story in my lap, and I'm like, holy. So, but this is a big one, and cannot be done just by myself, so I'm pitching it to somebody who could maybe make it happen. So,
That's great.
yeah.
Well, let's hear for all our filmmaker guests. Thank you so much, Chagrin Documentary Film Festival. Make sure to catch all of these films throughout the weekend. Thank you. Have a great day.